Amigos, bienvenidos a su podcast 18 Minutos. Soy Francisco Rodríguez Aguirre, presidente de Smart Speakers, el principal buró de conferencistas de Latinoamérica. Y me acompaña mi amigo Mauricio.
Encantado de estar nuevamente en una edición más de 18 Minutos. Pancho, pues empezamos a platicar de lo moderno, ¿no?
Sí. Hoy tenemos un gran invitado de talla internacional. Él es Chris Barton, un gran emprendedor del sector tecnológico e innovador. Fue cofundador de Shazam, una de las apps más importantes con más de 2,000 millones de descargas, de la cual fue su CEO y miembro del consejo, que posteriormente vendieron a Apple en $400 millones. También ocupó importantes posiciones en Google, en la que estuvo 11 años, y en Dropbox. Además, Chris Barton ha desarrollado 12 patentes. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Chris, how did Shazam started and how were those first days?
Gosh, well, Shazam started because I was doing my MBA at UC Berkeley, and I was really wanted to start a company. And this is way back in, when I came up with the idea, it was 1999. And so Shazam started with me brainstorming ideas of a company to start. And I had all these different ideas, and I was trying to pick which one do I want to come up with. And at this point, I was living in London, and I suddenly thought, I had the Shazam idea. I thought, what if, because mobile phones were very basic then. You could only really make phone calls, send text messages, and if you had a Nokia phone, you could play a game called Snake. And then that, if you remember that, but that was it. There were no apps or anything. And so I thought, what if you could identify songs from the sound in the air coming to the microphone of the mobile phone? So that was the idea. That was how everything got started, is that breakthrough idea that I had in around October of 1999. So that's how we got started. But of course, then we embarked on trying to find an amazing, super smart technologist who could invent this technology for us. That we found someone from Stanford to invent the technology, and then that took many months. And then after finally finding a genius and inventing this technology with a PhD from Stanford and a professor, and then, of course, raising the money to start the company. We had to raise money from angel investors, individual investors, to get initial funding for the company, and then later from venture capital firms, about $7.5 million to build the commercial service.
Chris, based on that, I'm curious, how did you start personally? I can imagine you in the cafeteria of your university, listening music or something like that. What was the seed of the driver that you said, what happened if we link music with the identification through the cell number or cell phone, personally, why not about traffic like Waze or something other ideas that have been very successful as well? Why music, and how was the curiosity that was part of yourself in that particular moment?
Yeah, honestly, at a personal level, I love music. I'm not a music expert. I should point out, I'm not a musician, and I'm not an expert. Like, I'm not the kind of person that can name all the different bands. We all have friends that can tell you what's playing on the radio, but I'm not that person. But I do like music, and so I really had a problem, which is that most of the music that I liked, and when I was a student, then the only really way I knew what it was is either it was a hit on the radio, and so you kept hearing the DJ say, "Oh, this is a certain band," or maybe my friends would tell me about a band. That was really the only ways that I could learn about the bands I liked, either a DJ on the radio or my good friends telling me. And I kept noticing that I would hear music in regular life, and I didn't know what it was. There was no solution back then. Actually, at the time I came up with the idea for Shazam, I was doing my MBA at Berkeley, as I mentioned, but I was living in London. So I went to do a semester abroad at London Business School as part of my Berkeley MBA. And in London, by the way, they play so much cool music. Like if you go to the bars and the restaurants and the cafes, they really play cool, unique music, more diverse music than what you find on the radio. The radio typically only plays the most popular 100 songs. But what you heard in these bars and cafes and clubs and so on in London was much more unique music. And I would hear this music and I would think, oh, that's a really cool song. What is that? And there literally was no solution. If I asked people, they didn't know. There was no, it wasn't written down anywhere. There was no way to find out. And so I really wanted a solution for that. So it was like a real need that I had. And by the way, you mentioned Waze and traffic and so on. You have to remember there were no apps back then, so you couldn't do any of that stuff on a mobile phone. You definitely couldn't do navigation or anything that required a graphical user interface on the phone, because all the phone showed was enough text to show you who you're calling.
It's interesting how evolution goes linked to very close to the moment we are living in that particular. Exactly. No applications. We were not familiar with apps at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And how were those early days at Shazam?
Yeah, the early years were, we had to do a lot of very hard things. I mean, we had to build the service, we had to launch the service, we had to scale this technology, we had to create a music database, we had to get partnerships with the mobile phone companies. There were a lot of very difficult things we had to do. We had to build a search engine of all the music from scratch. Technology was much more not as sophisticated as today. There was no Amazon Web Services and so on. So everything we had to build from scratch ourselves. So it was a lot of heavy lifting, and frankly, it was difficult. When we launched our service, we succeeded in doing all these things. We created the algorithm, the technology to make Shazam work. We built the database of music. We built the search engine. We integrated with the mobile phone companies. We did everything, and we launched the service. But back then, when we launched, it was a telephone number. You dialed the telephone number to use Shazam. You dialed the telephone number, made a phone call, and sent a text message.
Wow.
We sent a text message to your phone. That's how Shazam works. So you made a phone call, and we sent a text message back to your phone with the name of the song. Frankly, it didn't take off. We had barely any users, and we struggled. We actually struggled for about 6 years before Shazam really took off at the time that the iPhone App Store launched, which was 6 years after Shazam launched.
It's very interesting that. In benefit for the entrepreneurs, could we consider you as a pioneer in terms of artificial intelligence, AI? I mean, you started with this invention so far before it became a trend, AI.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, yeah, Shazam was AI. Artificial intelligence, the techniques used for artificial intelligence have become more and more advanced over many years. Some of the AI development started way back in the 1950s and 60s. And back then, they used different approaches for AI known as rules-based AI. It later evolved to become pattern recognition AI, and then later to machine learning, and then later to deep learning, neural network processing. So the technologies have evolved and have become far more advanced today. But the AI in general, which is defined as using a computer to do something that normally requires human intelligence. And so Shazam was a very early AI. And actually, I have an infographic that I created because I did research on the history of AI. Shazam was the first AI invention in history that became a mass consumer product, the very first one. So there were AI inventions in the years before Shazam, but none of them ever took off. None of them ever became used by many, many millions and millions of users, of consumers. And so Shazam was the first one. Of course, after Shazam, you had things like Siri. We all know Apple Siri, and Google Brain, which became the AI behind Google Search. And so on. So and of course now today even ChatGPT in the last few years. Yeah, Shazam was the first AI invention in history that became a mass consumer product.
And Chris, how did Shazam become a success? What was the moment and what you have to do so that it became this great success?
Yeah, ultimately what made it a success is that we, in a way, the technology world caught up to us, if that makes sense, because we launched so many years before. But once the iPhone App Store launched, that changed everything because now Shazam could have a nice, beautiful graphical user interface. You could see the app. We could do things like we could link to music downloads, so you could download the song to your phone on iTunes, or add it to a playlist with services like Spotify. And then we could show the lyrics of the song. You share it with friends. You could add to playlists and all these features. So Shazam became far more a better experience. You didn't have to remember a phone number. It was just an app on your phone. Everything became a much more frictionless experience, much more delightful experience. And Shazam took off as soon as the App Store launched. We were selected by Apple to be one of the first 500 apps to be included at the launch of the App Store, when the App Store launched, the very first App Store in the summer of 2008. And immediately we became one of the most popular apps, and we rocketed into the hundreds of millions of users. Today, Shazam has well over 300 million people that use Shazam every single month around the world. Over 2 billion people have downloaded the app. And people, it's an enormous reach. It's become a verb, actually. The name Shazam, it's not just a brand, it's actually a verb. You Shazam a song if you want to know the name of it. And that made it, really, really prevalent in terms of users using it to discover music. And that's really what made it attractive when Apple acquired Shazam. Apple acquired Shazam in 2018, and it really made sense because Apple Music was competing with Spotify as a streaming music service. Spotify was the market leader of streaming, and Apple had been the market leader for digital music in iTunes. And so Apple acquired Shazam because it's so complementary to streaming music.
Now you mentioned something. I would like to go to the early stages of Shazam and in your thinking. How did you decided to call this Shazam? What means for you Shazam? And second question, you created, working at Google, the career partnership framework for Android. What was your experience on that?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So the name Shazam, it just came to me a bit like the idea did, because I thought what it means, it's used in different TV, media, and so on. And if you look up in the Urban Dictionary, Shazam, what it means is it means to conjure magic. So to make magic come to the world. And so I thought, those early phones, if you hold your phone in the air, remember these very old phones before the App Store, you hold your phone in the air and it figures out the song that's in the air. It felt like a magical experience. So I thought, Shazam, it's like magic on your mobile phone. And that it just came to me, and I just wanted that name. I felt like it was such a great, inspirational name for people. And then with regards to Google, so I did join Google while after starting Shazam, and about 4 years after starting Shazam, I hired in a more experienced CEO who had much more experience than me, and he had actually run companies with hundreds of people. And then I stayed on the board of Shazam. So while remaining on the board of Shazam, I joined Google way back in 2004 when Google was actually still a private company. It had not yet gone public. It had only 2,000 employees. And I was their first employee that focused on mobile partnerships with the mobile phone companies like Telcel and American Mobile, in the United States, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and so on, and Telefonica, you name it. I worked with all these mobile phone companies, and of course, I joined the Android team, which was very early at Google, way when there was only one Android phone in the whole world. It was called the G1 mobile phone. On T-Mobile in the United States. And so I had to kind of create these new partnerships partnerships, how structure partnerships of how Google would partner with mobile phone companies and mobile device companies, and really create it from scratch. By thinking through, what would be the mutual benefits to the mobile phone companies and to Google and so on. I formed these partnerships. I have to tell you that in recent years I was even called in the Department of Justice versus Google antitrust trial as the second witness, because of course these partnerships became part of that whole trial. Fortunately, everything ended up okay in the end for Google. Yeah, it was a really, really amazing experience learning and being part of the Google team, seeing how the innovative thinking happens at Google, the great product creators, the founders of Google, Larry and Sergey, and the really amazing thinking that I love to bring into to share in my keynote speaking with audiences, to share those learnings from Google, from Shazam, and other places I've been. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Chris, you have a way of thinking, a system that you call start from zero. Can you explain it to us, please?
Yeah, so start from zero. It's really what I consider to be the way of thinking that we don't do, but by default. But if we do it, we can make bring innovation to the world. We can really make big things happen, overcome these big obstacles that allow us to really see into the future and bring the future closer. And I call it start from zero, and it's made up really of 4 core ways of thinking differently. One of them, the first one, is how to come up with big new ideas that are outside of what you would normally think will work. The second one has to do with overcoming all these obstacles, because typically we often have a big idea, but then we fail to really bring it to the world because we encounter so many obstacles, and so we give up, or we concede. We make something that's not as great as we were hoping because of all the obstacles along the way, and getting past those obstacles by being very, very creative. The third is really a way of thinking about what I call eliminating friction. We all know that we want to make things simple and delightful, and we want to eliminate the friction, but we often fail to do it. As you see, there's still so much friction in the world. Things are still difficult. We all encounter difficulties on a website and with a piece of software. There's always little problems that we face. And so I try to open people's eyes into how to really eliminate friction. How do you spot these pieces of difficulty so that you can remove them for customers, for employees, for partners, suppliers, for everyone that you work with. And then, of course, the personal part, the emotional part, the part that, making something that's your work and making it personal, making you care deeply about it, what I call connect to emotions, so that you really, really build the most amazing things. And that's what usually is what fuels the amazing innovations that you see come from so many companies, is that they care so personally, so emotionally about making something amazing. And then we did that with Shazam.
It is great. We're almost there in terms of, 18 minutes are 18 minutes now. Mm-hmm. Just if we could take a couple of minutes. I used to work in some sort of mentorship to entrepreneurs. Is there something that you could recommend to young people or any independent, or no matter the age, some recommendations, thinking in the very, very early beginning of your career as entrepreneur? What would you recommend? Obstacles, strengths? I don't know.
Yeah. I actually have one great recommendation that it's such an important recommendation that I plan to do the same with my son. He's only 17, but in the next few years, he wants to be an entrepreneur in his career. And so it's something that I'm going to recommend he does. And I recommend it for all young entrepreneurs, which is, I call it game tape. And so just like in America, the great NBA players, the basketball players, the way they get so good is they keep watching the videos of themselves and their competitors, and they watch the videos and they analyze them and really try to figure out how to learn by watching all these videos and how to make a little bit better moves the next time. And I think entrepreneurs can learn the best by watching lots of interviews with other entrepreneurs. Like I watch tons of them on YouTube. There's podcasts like so many podcasts. Founders is one podcast, another one called 20 VC. But many of these podcasts where they interview how I built this is another one. and just listening to all these podcasts and learning from all the stories of other entrepreneurs. It's the single best recommendation I give to all young entrepreneurs.
Great, thank you.
And just one last question, Chris. You as well got into Dropbox when they had only 90 employees. So you moved from the startup to a big company. How did things change, and how did you adapt to those changes?
Yeah, so I joined Dropbox, as you said, when it was 90 employees, and when I left, it was 1,500 employees, and it was a public company. So yeah, no, it grew tremendously, and we were very fast moving, and we had to hire, and to really mature into a much bigger company. I think that it's there's a lot of growing pains when you go from being a startup to being a mature big company. I think the learnings is just about keeping a very high bar, really hiring very high quality people, and then bringing in more and more people that have big experience that they can bring to teach. We call it, I think at Google they call it adult supervision, but bringing in people who are very experienced that can teach the younger folks how to create the structure that you need as you grow and scale as a company. So that's really the main thing that was so important for such a high growth company.
Well, we got to the time. We even passed for a few minutes. Thank you very much, Chris. Very interesting. And you are a great speaker.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing how this episode comes out.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amigos
Thank
de
you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Amigos de 18 minutos, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Si les gusta, por favor, compártenlo. Suscríbanse en YouTube o en Spotify. Mauricio.
Encantado y gracias por haber invitado a Chris. Fantastic lessons and very, very, very interesting points of view.
Muchas gracias y hasta luego. Bye, Chris.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Bye.